everyone, welcome to Democrafting the Future. You're here with me, Corinne, and Saray, and we're here at the Nordic Demographic Symposium at Hinsgau Slot in Middelfart, Denmark. We are about to show you some video interviews that we did with some of the guests here, and we're really excited to show you what we did. If you two just want to maybe introduce yourselves and your background a little bit, that would be a great start.
Gøsta.
My name is Gøsta Esping-Andersen. I am originally Danish, but I work and live in Barcelona now, and I'm working at the University of Pompeu Fabra. Previously, I was 20 years in Italy working, the European University Institute and the University of Trento, and then University of Bocconi. And my career started at Harvard University. I studied demography at the University of Wisconsin, Madison.
So you have quite experience. And you, Tomáš?
I am Tomáš Sobotka. I am Czech by origin. I did my PhD at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. I work as a deputy director of the Vienna Institute of Demography at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. And I have been doing research on everything around fertility rates, low fertility, childlessness, and anything related to that.
And why did you choose demography at first place? Why?
I started actually studying in economics, and in those days in the University of Copenhagen, there was one professor called Mathisen, who was the only demographer ever in Denmark. He gave a course that wasn't particularly exciting, but I got very interested in demographic issues, and so I decided, of course, that I couldn't study demography in Denmark. There was no program, so that's why I went to the US to get my PhD.
When I was in high school in Prague, that was in the early 1990s, after the regime change in Czechia, and everything was changing super fast. At that time, fertility was declining rapidly from one year to the next, and there has been a lot of discussion why. And I was completely hooked up on the topic of population change, population dynamics. So then I decided to study demography at the university in Prague, which was possible at that time because they opened the demography program a few years before that.
And then you decided to go for Groningen.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a happy coincidence. I had a professor in Prague, Tomáš, who was always enthusiastically sending students out abroad for all the exchange stays, Socrates, Erasmus, other possibilities. And he helped me and my colleague arranging a research stay at the University of Amsterdam, also in preparation for a PhD research in Prague. When I was there, he said, look, you have to talk to Professor Anton Kajsten. He can give you an informal comment and do some supervision. And Anton Kajsten offered me a PhD study in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, when I got there. The story why I ended up in Groningen, that's another story, but I ended up doing a PhD in the Netherlands.
Okay, yeah. Nice, so I think we should deep dive into fertility now. So, Gøsta, we had yesterday this really nice talk about the fertility puzzle. Would you like to share something regarding?
Yeah, well, clearly the world has been the Western world has been very preoccupied about this sharp decline in fertility. The media has also been very heavily involved in discussions about why. And nobody has really come up with any answers. And I don't have the final answer, but I think I'm getting some clues as to what were the underlying what was the momentum behind it. One thing that everybody knows is that the drop in fertility is almost exclusively first births. That is, a lot of men and women in our society today have stopped even becoming parents to begin with. The second thing that we have established pretty clearly is that it's very concentrated among the low educated. And not exclusively, but predominantly. What that points to is an explanation that moves you out of demography and into economics. And it has a lot to do with the changing labor markets due to deindustrialization and the rise of the new service economy. That has left behind especially male, low-skilled workers that are losing their position that they once had, that was safe, well paid, with a secure job in the industry, making cars and so forth and so on. As that moves to China, these population groups, mainly male, are more and more marginalized, losing status relative to the rest of the population, and beginning also to have more and more problems, probably of alcoholism, I don't know, I mean, this is purely speculation. And what is very clear, they are partnering less and less. And that is, I think, what is the engine behind the fall in fertility.
Thomas, we see you making some notes. Do you want to comment on Gøsta?
I think I can complement the story because I'm looking at the story from somewhat different angles. I think the way how we were used looking at fertility rates, having a clear regional division in Europe, thinking about some parts of Europe and some parts of the highly developed countries of having very low fertility rates, let's say Southern European countries, versus, for instance, Western and Nordic paradise. I think this has been changing in the last 15 years, and I see a little bit more fundamental change perhaps than Gøsta was arguing about, because I also think that the ideals about parenthood are changing, that people are not so strongly fixed, younger people are not so strongly fixed on having children as a necessity in life, and are showing higher degree of uncertainty about whether they want to have children and why, and also more flexibility in terms of thinking that it depends a little bit on their future partnership situations, partners' preferences, and this all is happening in a situation when we are living in a more uncertain world with more uncertain future. I also see a few kind of more objective economic determinants which haven't been, interestingly enough, discussed so much in the Nordic context. Relative incomes of younger generations in Nordic countries and Western European countries have been stagnating since the Great Recession compared to the middle-aged and older generations. This is a different situation across Europe. This doesn't apply to Central and Eastern Europe, for instance. Housing prices have been going up very sharply everywhere, and the housing crisis is not going away anytime soon. So there are some objective reasons to think also that even better educated people have reasons to postpone parenthood. We see in the last few years higher inflation rate after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and in the models which I've been doing with my colleagues in Vienna, we see this has clearly a negative impact on fertility rates. And unfortunately, we also see a generation which often declares that they will not have it better than their parents in terms of economic security and income in the future. And this kind of negative way of thinking about the future is also impinging on fertility plans and realized fertility.
I have another aspect of factor I would like you to comment on, and it's gender equality. Like, how much does gender equality play into it, and also the change of gender roles we see like that. You mentioned that men are more unemployed now because they don't have the jobs they had before. Women start to work. Like, how did that affect fertility?
I think the revolution of women's roles is one fundamental aspect of changes in fertility also, and changing patterns of partnering. One reason that you have this very large percent of low-educated males that are single is because women don't want them. They are undesirable from the point of view of women, because we have to remember that now part of the female revolution is resulted in women having more education than men. And that means that women have also, education-wise, distanced themselves more and more from that traditional, let's say, manual working class male. So that is part of it. The other part of it has to do with the long-term dynamics of the revolution of women's roles. In the first stage, women started changing their roles, both in terms of starting to have jobs, pursuing careers, and investing in their human capital. But men did not adjust to the first stage of women's changing role aspirations as well as reality. So you had a gender mismatch or asymmetry in terms of the adaptation to women's new roles. That I think is a big part of the tensions and let's say precariousness of partnerships in a lot of the Western world. As the revolution of women's roles begins to mature, you begin to see that men slowly adapt. And you begin, especially in Scandinavia, to see genuine approximation of gender symmetry within the four walls or behind the four walls of the house of these partners. For example, the average Danish male now that is partnered, he contributes about 43% of total domestic tasks, including childcare. And he's mainly childcare. 30% of Danish men contribute more than the female partner. So you're beginning to see in Scandinavia this kind of asymmetries. But we also see the stagnation of the revolution. And the US is the prime example of a country where the revolution stalled. And basically you have about 30% of the American population that has not been moving along in that revolution. And that's not just because men are stubbornly traditional, it's also because a big slice of American women continue to be very traditional in terms of their partnership preferences and also infertility. So you have, as a result of it in the United States, you have a clear two worlds coexisting in terms of gender relations, fertility, and marital behavior.
Do you think that on the part of the US that is because of a religious perspective, that the women and the men both want to still be in the traditional relationships? Like, why is the US so much different from Scandinavian countries?
Yes, there's clear evidence that there is strongly correlated with religion, but not exclusively. It's also correlated with areas of the United States. It's more prevalent in the southern states than it is in Northeast or in the West Coast. So those two worlds coexisting inside the United States are also geographically quite specific. So you have much more traditional sections of the United States map, and you have much more kind of Scandinavian style areas, especially in the Northeast and California.
And what about the other continents, like Asia?
I think Asia is a great example, especially East Asia, where we observe the extreme low fertility today, is a great example of a place which completely lacks gender equality, which has developed super fast economically, has become very competitive, which now provides high education to everyone. South Korea, about 80% of young people, both males and females, get university educated today. But the society didn't catch up, didn't adapt at all to this changed ways how people get educated, to their changed aspirations, and to the fact that women are expected to be in the labor force and have careers. And this is perhaps also a way, as some way of seeing it as a laboratory of what happens in extremely gender unequal societies, where women are not realistically able to combine their aspirations for career, their aspirations for having a good partnership, and for their aspirations for having children. In South Korea, the job environment is, so it's not only about the family environment and about partnerships, it's also about the jobs. Jobs are not only very competitive and demanding in terms of time investment and the hours worked, but gender wage gap in Korea is the highest among high-income countries, around 30%, because many employers are still having these traditional expectations that women will soon leave their jobs and will become mothers. So they are not promoting them, they are not giving them good and secure positions, and they are kind of often letting them stuck in insecure, low-paid positions. That's the start of it. Then later in the life course, many women decide against marrying, because marriage in Korea means that you are often expected to have a child soon. It comes with the whole package, but also women are still expected to cook and clean, take care of the in-laws, and this is a hard package, right? So in this next stage, this is where household inequalities come to the fore. Many women are staying unpartnered, unmarried, and childless into their late 30s and often lifetime, which is, as said, because it's often not desired or not an intended pathway they have. This is a sad consequence of extreme gender inequalities which we observe in that part of the world.
So you have linked the falling fertility rates to gender equality and also like economical reasons. So what would be your answer to my question if this is super relevant? Why we see such a fertility decline in countries like Nordic Europe, where the gender equality is in very high level and also they're high income? Why we can see that still, like for example, extreme downfall in Finland or Sweden also? Why this is prevalent?
That's an excellent question. Do you want to start, or do I start?
Shall I start?
You can start.
My argument as regards Scandinavia, but not just Scandinavia, we see the same pattern also in the Netherlands, in the UK, in the United States, that we went from a level of fertility that was very respectable, and then suddenly, from one year to the next, it just collapsed. My story there has to do returning there to the low-skilled, low-educated population that it was already brewing, and then with the Great Recession, 2008 up to 2010-11, that population suffered extraordinarily severe economic problems, unemployment, etc. So their precariousness, economically speaking, accelerated enormously due to the Great Recession. It's not that the Great Recession created the drop in fertility, but as we know, the drop in fertility was concentrated among the low educated. And what was driving there was this increased precariousness, very much driven by that Great Recession, that then after the Great Recession continued and was reinforced in a big way. And I think that is the underlying reason why suddenly we got this drop in fertility, because the low-skilled simply stopped having kids, at least mainly among the low-skilled, but not exclusively, right? And so I think that's the story. That in my reading of the data.
What about you, Tomáš?
So to complement Gøsta's story, and I agree with the reasons you are naming, but I just add a few more. I think I would start again with mentioning that the aspirations about life and about family and fertility are perhaps different today among young adults, also in the Nordic countries. And if aspirations are changing, fertility preferences become less clear-cut, more ambiguous. We see also more people living in partnerships are delaying the time when they have a first child, and this delay in first birth has partly contributed to the decline in fertility in the Nordic countries, but is also changing our expectations about the future. So maybe 15 years ago we would be able to sit here and say, if you create perfect conditions for childbearing, we would take these preferences that people want to have 2 kids on average for granted. You would end up with having family size of 2 in these Nordic paradise countries with fantastic policies and gender equality. Today I wouldn't sign up for this argument. Today I would say, because people have much more flexible fertility aspirations, and some of them will not agree with their partners. Some of them will have other important or interesting things to do in life. Even with perfect gender equality, and we are not there, and even with wonderful policies, fertility will not get back to the replacement level, even in the Nordic countries. But what you will get with very good gender equality in this region is that you will have higher fertility among the better educated women, which has been also discussed today at the conference for Denmark. Something you don't observe, or we don't observe in other parts of the world, where highly educated women have the lowest fertility rates. And you will also have people much better being empowered to realize their fertility plans. So at the end of the day, when we look at cohort fertility of people who are now in their 20s and 30s, I'm sure Nordic countries will have higher fertility rates than Southern Europe, much higher than East Asian countries, but not close to the replacement level, but maybe at 1.6 or 1.7.
I'm so sorry.
I agree completely with that. If I may add one little additional, there's a demographer called Arnstein Osve, who is Norwegian, but he was a colleague of mine at Bocconi University. He has, with some others, has coined the idea that there's no longer any norm about what should people have in terms of number of children. In the old days, that is, when I was young, the norm was a 2-child family. That norm, according to the research, has disappeared. And that is part of Tomáš's argument there, that we don't have any norms about what really number of kids we should have, so it could be anything.
So maybe I would add 2 more things to that, keeping this conversation endless. One thing is that, of course, this has been partly envisioned by Ron Lezage and Dirk van de Ka when they started arguing about second demographic transition and writing about it. They were arguing part of the transition is that people will not be restrained so much about pronatalist societies. They will be much more free to have different kinds of family preferences about living arrangements and family configurations they want to live in. And I think they were arguing about this ahead of their times, that it's only now when we are living in times when young people feel much more free from these pronatalist pressures which were in our societies, even in the Nordic countries, present a few decades ago. And then there is a big question mark hanging over a thing which none of us mention it yet, social media, how the world of social media is influencing young people and their outlook on parenthood. If you look at TikTok and the kind of ways how parenthood and having children is often presented negatively, 100 reasons or 30 reasons for not having kids.
Yes, I've seen the list.
and you know, my daughter 14 is exposed to all of that, and she's not on TikTok, but she knows about it. And also kind of the exposure towards children is so small compared to the exposure to cute pets among kids hanging out on social media, that I think this is also changing plans and preferences about children.
I have a boy who's 21 years old. I asked him, how many children would you like to have? And he said 2.
Fantastic. My daughter tells you 0 or tells me 0. She wants to have pets, not kids.
I think that's a great way or point to stop because we're out of time, but maybe you have really quick a fun fact or your favorite fact about demography that you would like to share with us. As short as possible.
Yeah, the next
You want to begin?
I don't have a fun.
Or
I actually have one. The 4 laws of demography.
Okay.
Law number 1 of demography is some do and some don't. Law number 2 is everything is different in the South. Law number 3, nothing works in India. Law number 4, there are no laws in demography.
I like that. That's good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I cannot bring up anything better, so I think it's a good time to finish
Yeah,
with this.
thank you so much, guys.
you
That was
so
really
much.
great. Thank you for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you.